Hello students, welcome back. Now after doing gametogenesis, we come to the ovarian cycle and the menstrual cycle. So without wasting any time, let's start. Ovarian cycle, it refers to the series of changes which begin with the formation of an ovarian follicle and end with the degeneration of corpus luteum. So when you describe an ovarian cycle, you have to describe the formation of ovarian follicle and you have to describe the degeneration of corpus luteum. Now ova develop from oogonia present in cortex of ovary, while the Graafian follicle is formed by stromal cells which surrounds the ovum and protects it. We will see how. So ovarian cycle. So we have to first describe the process of formation of ovarian follicle. So let us start with the stages here. So first the primordial follicle is formed. The oocyte and flat surrounding cells which are derived from stromal cells form the primordial follicle. So this is the primordial follicle. Here we have the oocyte and these are the flat cells which are derived from the stromal cells. So then after that the primary follicle is formed. The flattened cells now become columnar and this is called primary follicle. So primordial follicle becomes primary and this becomes multilaminar primary follicle with the appearance of zona pellucida. So this layer is zona pellucida, the homogeneous membrane which appears between follicular cells and oocyte. Then secondary follicle is formed. How is it formed? When the follicular cells proliferate to form several layers of cells. So the follicular cells form the membrana granulosa. Then the true follicle is formed with the appearance of the cavity in the membrana granulosa, and this cavity contains the fluid, the liquor folliculi. Then the mature ovarian follicle is formed. And how do you describe the mature ovarian follicle? Here with increase in size, oocyte is surrounded by cells of Cumulus oophoricus. So oocyte is surrounded by cells of Cumulus oophoricus and this oocyte is now placed eccentrically, that is at the margin. The cells attaching oocyte to wall of follicle constitute discus proligerus. So here we are talking of this region, the discus proligerus. So these are the cells attaching oocyte to wall of follicle. Theca interna is there on the inner side outside the membrana granulosa and theca externa is on the outer side. Theca interna is formed from stromal cells. Theca externa is formed from fibrous tissue. Now theca interna cell layer later becomes thecal gland which secretes estrogen and this lies inner to the theca externa. So this is the mature ovarian follicle. Now ovulation, how it takes place? The enlarged follicle reaches ovarian surface forming a bulging. The stroma and theca on this side are stretched. So an avascular area called stigma appears over the most convex point. Cells of Cumulus oophoricus get loosened by accumulation of fluid between them. The follicle ultimately ruptures and a secondary oocyte is shed. So when the ovarian follicle ruptures, what is shed? Secondary oocyte. So when follicle ruptures, its cells enlarge and require a polyhedral shape. The cytoplasm gets filled with a yellow pigment and now this structure is called corpus luteum or yellow body. Some theca interna cells also contribute to corpus luteum and the cells which are polyhedral in shape contain abundant smooth endoplasmic reticulum and lipids. So we can see here after the rupture the wall of follicle, it looks like this and ultimately the cells become polyhedral, they contain lipids, smooth endoplasmic reticulum and they have got this lutein pigment and what is formed? Corpus luteum. So sometimes in the examination a question comes, write a short note on corpus luteum. So corpus luteum is of two types, corpus luteum of menstruation and corpus luteum of pregnancy. So if fertilization has not taken place, then corpus luteum persists for 14 days and if fertilization has taken place then corpus luteum persists for about 4 months and in both cases it secretes progesterone, but here the corpus luteum is larger and it is required till the 4th month because after the 4th month the placenta is there and that secretes progesterone. So then the corpus luteum of pregnancy is not required. So corpus luteum, you describe its formation after rupture of follicle. Describe the cells of corpus luteum, the yellow pigment, lutein, and then you describe that it's of two types depending on whether pregnancy has taken place or not. So it may be of menstruation or corpus luteum of pregnancy. This one lasts for 14 days and this one persists for 4 months, because after that it is not required as the placenta now begins to secrete the progesterone. So I told you, when you describe the ovarian cycle, you have to describe the formation of the ovarian follicle and the degeneration of corpus luteum. So what happens is ultimately corpus luteum becomes the corpus albicans. And what about the unruptured follicle? So there are follicles in different stages in the ovary. So the one which ruptures, that is going to form the corpus luteum. What about the unruptured follicle? It also degenerates and the theca interna cells persist as interstitial glands. They secrete estrogen. So after degeneration, the unruptured follicle forms the corpora atretica or interstitial gland, and ultimately, whether it is unruptured follicle or ruptured follicle, finally the corpus albicans is formed. So that is the fate of the ovarian follicle. So that was about the ovarian cycle. Now we come to the menstrual cycle. So what is the definition of menstrual cycle? Cyclical changes occurring in endometrium every month. That is called the menstrual cycle. So menstrual cycle begins with the onset of menstrual bleeding, and it is divided into 4 phases: menstrual, postmenstrual, proliferative and secretory. So in this figure you can see the 4 phases. So in a typical 28-day cycle, you can appreciate till the 4th day menstrual phase, 4th to 8th day postmenstrual day, then from the 9th to 20th day you have got the proliferative phase, and then from 21 days onwards till 28 days is the secretory phase. So cycle begins with the onset of bleeding. It begins here. The cycle is also divided roughly into follicular phase, in which the effects of estrogen predominate, and luteal phase, in which the effects of progesterone predominate. So if I start from here, postmenstrual phase, up till here, so most of the proliferative phase, so postmenstrual plus most of proliferative phase, that is the follicular phase, and then some part of proliferative phase and the secretory phase, that is the luteal phase, when effects of progesterone predominate. So follicular phase, let us describe it first. Changes are brought by estrogen, so produced by developing follicle. So most of the postmenstrual phase and most of the proliferative phase, they are coming in the follicular phase. In luteal phase, the changes take place under the influence of progesterone predominantly. So some part of proliferative phase and the secretory phase, that is the luteal phase. So if you get a note on menstrual cycle, do mention the different stages, and you also mention that okay, 4 stages are there, and a cycle is also divided into the follicular phase and the luteal phase, in which effects of estrogen and progesterone predominate respectively. So what are the changes taking place during the menstrual cycle? So there are changes in the endometrium. What happens is there is progressive increase in thickness of endometrium. So you can see here the menstrual bleeding is taking place here. This is the menstrual phase. Proliferative phase is there, and see how the thickness of endometrium is increasing. And ultimately again, when bleeding takes place, there is a decrease in endometrial thickness. What are the changes in the uterine glands? Well, in the postmenstrual phase, you can see the image here. In the proliferative, here the cells are cuboidal in the postmenstrual phase. So in the proliferative phase, they become columnar and their apical parts are full of secretions. These parts are eventually shed off, and again in the secretory phase, the epithelium becomes cuboidal. So there are changes taking place in the uterine glands. What about changes in the stroma? Well, in the postmenstrual phase, stromal cells are uniformly distributed, but in the proliferative phase, we can see the endometrium has got 3 layers. So stratum compactum and stratum basale. Here the cells, they are well defined. So, but the middle layer, stratum spongiosum, has developed in the proliferative phase, where the part of stroma surrounding body of glands becomes spongy. So stratum spongiosum, here you can see that there is more gap between the cells. So here the cells are uniformly distributed in stratum compactum and basale, while in spongiosum the gap in the cells is more. So this is seen, these three layers can be seen in the proliferative phase, and they cannot be made out in the postmenstrual phase. And in the secretory phase, these three layers become better defined. So stratum compactum, spongiosum and basale, they develop in the proliferative phase, but they become more well defined in the secretory phase, while you cannot distinguish these three layers in the postmenstrual phase. Then what happens is, just before the onset of next bleeding, there is lowering of levels of both estrogen and progesterone. So withdrawal of both these hormones, estrogen and progesterone, leads to menstrual bleeding. And in the absence of pregnancy, the endometrium is then shed off, stratum compactum and spongiosum is shed off, so basale remains there. And what is left is 0.5 mm thick endometrium. It consists of stratum basale and basal portions of uterine glands. After that, the epithelium of glands rapidly proliferates. So it has proliferated to reform the lining epithelium, one can make out here. What are the changes in the arteries? So in the proliferative phase, the small arteries grow in length. In the secretory phase, arteries supplying the superficial 2/3 become very tortuous, and they are called spiral arteries, while arteries of basal 1/3 are short and straight. So changes in the arteries also take place. So we have done that the thickness of the endometrium is increased. We have seen the endometrium can be divided into the three layers, and then the changes in the glands are there, that cells become columnar and then again they become cuboidal. Here we see the fourth change is also in the arteries, that in the secretory phase, the arteries supplying the superficial 2/3 become very tortuous, and they are called spiral arteries. So all these changes, why they are taking place? To provide a suitable medium or environment for the fertilized ovum. So that is a sort of a reception being arranged for the fertilized ovum, that when fertilized ovum comes, the uterus should be ready to receive it for the continuation of pregnancy. So these changes, they take place every month and constitute the menstrual cycle. Now, estimation of timing of ovulation. So if you get a note on menstrual cycle, describe the give the definition of menstrual cycle, give its 4 stages, give the changes taking place in the endometrium, why these changes take place to prepare for the fertilized ovum. You also mention there that how estimation of timing of ovulation can be done. So estimation of timing of ovulation can be done by 2 methods: basal body temperature and luteinizing hormone surge. So rise in temperature indicates ovulation. See here. So there is a fall in temperature at about time of ovulation followed by a rise. So there is a fall in temperature followed by a rise, and this rise in temperature indicates ovulation. Fertility is maximum 2 to 3 days before rise of temperature. So one is basal body temperature method for estimating the timing of ovulation. Other is luteinizing hormone estimation, that if there is a surge in luteinizing hormone, then we can make out that the ovulation, we can predict that the ovulation will take place 36 hours later. So a sudden increase in luteinizing hormone level in blood takes place near middle of cycle, and it stimulates ovulation. So ovulation takes place 36 hours after luteinizing hormone surge or increase. Now, why we need to know the timing of ovulation? This is important for cases of infertility or when a couple wants to plan a pregnancy. See, ovum is viable for not greater than 2 days, while the spermatozoa in vagina die within 4 days. So there is a very limited period where if intercourse takes place, that is, if intercourse takes place between 4 days before ovulation to 2 days after ovulation. This is the critical period where if intercourse takes place, then there is likelihood that the pregnancy will take place, the fertilization will take place. So couples who want to conceive or are finding it difficult to conceive, they are advised to have intercourse during this period, 4 days before ovulation to 2 days after ovulation. That is why we need to know the timing of ovulation to plan the pregnancy. So period between ovulation and next menstrual bleeding is constant at about 14 days. That you need to know. Now those who don't want to conceive, for them the contraceptive pills are given to those ladies. So what do? They suppress maturation of follicles and therefore ovulation. So we want to suppress ovulation there. So these pills contain northeasternone acetate and estradiol, and the strength is 1 milligram and 50 microgram respectively. So 28 pills are there in the and 21 pills have hormones and 7 pills do not have the hormones. So in the strip there are 28 pills and 21 pills have got the hormones. So after 5 days of bleeding, start of menstruation, the pills are started. Normal menstruation occurs during 7 days in which pills without hormones are taken. This makes sense because it is due to the withdrawal of hormones that bleeding takes place. So you have to understand the science behind the contraceptive pills, the composition of contraceptive pills, and that the strip contains 28 pills and bleeding takes place during the 7 days in which pills without hormones are taken. So that brings me to the end of the topic.